I go by Alex, and I'm 27. If you were to chat with my folks, they'd likely peg me as the challenging one in our family. Not that I was ever a troublemaker or anything actually, it's the opposite. I've always been pretty driven, handled my own finances, and generally had my act together. But, in their view, that somehow made me the go-to person for any family crisis, the one who's supposed to chip in a bit extra whenever someone else was having a tough time. And when I say, someone else, I'm really talking about my older sister, Emily. She's 30, but honestly you wouldn't know it by how she goes about life. She's never really stuck with a job for more than a couple of months, always has some story about why she can't cover rent, and has this knack for convincing my parents that it's never her doing. She's a master at flipping every situation to make herself the underdog. Her boss was always picking on her. Her roommates were the worst, and finding a decent job? Impossible. Meanwhile, she's been in this endless loop of crashing at my parents' place, or with whichever friend is kind enough to offer their couch. I figured out pretty early on that if I wanted any semblance of a normal, calm life, I had to create some space. It wasn't a walk in the park, though. My parents have this way of pulling me into her messes, usually with some line about family sticking together, or how lucky I am to have a stable job. That's why I put in the effort to draw some lines, to make it super clear that I wasn't her personal ATM. But, as I was about to discover, my parents never truly got those boundaries, they just bided their time, waiting for the perfect chance to completely disregard them. Everything blew up during a family dinner. I should have seen the red flags the second I stepped into my parents' house. My mom was overly affectionate, my dad was strangely silent, and Emily could hardly meet my gaze. Something was definitely brewing. But I had zero clue how messed up it was about to get. Dinner kicked off like any other, with the standard chit-chat and my mom's usual subtle digs about how she barely sees me these days. I mostly just played along, concentrating on my meal and hoping to get through the evening unscathed. Then, just when I thought I might escape the drama, my mom placed her fork down, clasped her hands on the table, and dropped the bomb. "So, Alex," she began, using that overly sugary tone she reserves for things I won't appreciate, "your sister's planning to stay with you for a bit." I nearly choked. The room fell dead silent, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for me to just roll with it. But I didn't utter a word. Not just yet. I simply sat there, my gaze fixed on them, anticipating the rest of the story. Because there was always a rest of the story. And, of course, my mom continued. "She's been going through a lot lately, and you've got that lovely apartment all to yourself," she added, as if it were the most obvious solution. "It's perfect. You can help her find her footing, and she won't be a strain on us. A strain on them. Because, God forbid, my parents actually tell Emily to grow up and handle her own life. Nope, that was apparently my responsibility. But I still remained silent. I just sat there, letting them ramble on, observing the whole scene like a train wreck in slow motion. "Yeah," my dad chimed in, finally deciding to add his 2 cents. "It's not like it'll break the bank for you. And she really just needs a solid place to get her life together." That's when Emily finally decided to chime in. "It'll just be a few months," she claimed, in a voice that sounded way too practiced. "And like I can totally help out around the place too." That was a blatant lie, and we were all aware of it. Emily never helped out with anything. She hardly even tidied up after herself. But I still didn't show any reaction. I simply gave a small nod, as if I was genuinely considering it. 'Cause in truth I was biding my time. Waiting for them to wrap up their little performance. Waiting for them to fully commit to this ridiculous idea. Waiting for them to make the biggest blunder of all, presuming that I was actually going to play along. I let the silence linger just long enough to make them squirm. I could sense their eyes on me, anticipating some kind of response, frustration, pushback. But I offered them none of that. Instead I took a slow breath, placed my fork down and nodded. "Okay," I responded plainly. For a brief moment, no one uttered a word. My mom blinked, as if she hadn't anticipated such an easy agreement. My dad looked relieved, as if he had been preparing for a showdown. And Emily, well, Emily just smirked like she had triumphed in some battle she hadn't even engaged in. "Really?" my mom inquired, her eyes narrowing. "You're genuinely okay with this?" Shrugged. "Sure. If it helps Emily get back on track, why wouldn't I be?" That was all it took. My parents instantly eased up, and my mom launched into a whole spiel about how proud she was of me for being such a supportive sibling. My dad nodded in agreement, and Emily, who had obviously been ready for a fight, just sat back in her chair, looking self-satisfied. I could practically see her mind racing. She probably believed she had executed some brilliant manipulation, that I had folded just as she and my parents had envisioned. I could imagine her mentally settling into my apartment, choosing which room she'd claim, picturing how she'd rearrange things to suit her comfort. And why wouldn't she? She had gotten away with it before. She used to take my clothes and act surprised when I got angry about it. She borrowed my laptop and conveniently forgot to give it back. She convinced our parents to pressure me into covering for her. Just this once, of course, except it never was. Emily wasn't just privileged. She was a pro at bending reality, making herself appear vulnerable, and making me seem like the bad guy whenever I resisted. But this time, she was completely clueless about what was about to unfold. "So, when are you thinking of moving in?" I inquired casually, taking another bite of my food as if this were just a regular conversation. My mom practically glowed. "Oh, we were thinking this weekend. That way, she can get settled before she starts job hunting again. This weekend. Absolutely perfect." Emily stretched her arms above her head, as if she had just hit the jackpot. "Yeah, I don't really have that much stuff anyway. Mostly clothes, a couple of boxes. It won't take long to get everything set up." I nodded once more, as if everything was perfectly fine by me. "Sounds great. Just give me a heads up on the time and I'll be there." That part, at least, wasn't a fabrication. I would definitely be present. Not at the apartment, naturally. No, I'd be somewhere far better, observing from a secure distance as Emily, my parents, and a vehicle packed with her belongings arrived at my previous residence. The one I hadn't occupied for weeks. The one I had offloaded. The one that now had a completely new owner, who had no inkling of what was about to transpire. And I wasn't going to intervene. Not just yet. I was going to let them discover precisely what their little scheme had gotten them into. The days leading up to that weekend felt like an eternity. Every time I envisioned what was about to occur, a smirk would tug at my lips, but I maintained my composure around my parents. I didn't want them picking up any odd vibes from me. Instead, I let the plan play out exactly as I had pictured it, like a slow-motion train wreck, but with me on the sidelines, casually observing it all. Saturday arrived, and I spent the day away from the apartment, tackling tasks I had been postponing for weeks. It was impeccable timing. My parents would arrive at the apartment, anticipating unloading all of Emily's possessions, and they'd quickly realize something had gone terribly awry. Around midday my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. A minute later my phone rang again, and this time I opted to answer. "Hello," I said, striving to sound as laid back as possible. "Alex," my mom's voice came through, strained with frustration. "What's the deal?" I could hear my dad's voice in the backdrop. His tone also elevated. They weren't furious yet, just baffled, disoriented, like they had entered the incorrect house or found themselves in a bizarre, unfamiliar setting. "What's up?" I inquired, feigning innocence. "We just arrived," my mom continued, her voice trembling. "What's going on here? The apartment's empty. The landlord mentioned it was sold weeks ago, and there's a new tenant living here now." I couldn't help it. My lips curled into a smile. "Oh, really? That's so strange. I didn't know anything about that," I replied, playing the part of the confused, completely uninvolved son. "But I guess I should have mentioned it sooner, huh?" My dad's voice cut in, sharp with frustration. "What's going on, Alex? Why didn't you tell us? You promised Emily she could move in, and now we're stuck here with her stuff." It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. I could hear Emily in the background now, her voice growing louder, panicked, like she was trying to piece together the situation. It was music to my ears. "Listen, I don't know what to tell you," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I thought you guys were aware. I moved out a few weeks ago, sold the place. Didn't think I needed to mention it since, well, it wasn't really relevant to me anymore." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, sold the place?" My mom sounded like she was trying to process the words. "You sold your apartment. You didn't even tell us." "Yeah," I said, taking my time with the words. "It was kind of a last-minute thing, honestly. I guess I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But yeah, I moved out. New chapter and all that." My dad's voice rose in pitch. "So, what are we supposed to do now, Alex? You can't just drop something like that on us. Emily had plans, and we've already packed her things up. You don't think we deserve to know what's going on?" I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep the smirk off my face. I was loving this. "You know, I really did think you guys would know," I said, dragging it out. "I guess I assumed you were in the loop. You know how I can be quiet, keeping to myself. Maybe I should have called you when I moved, but honestly I didn't think it was that important. You didn't ask, and I didn't offer." The frustration was palpable on the other side of the phone. My mom's voice had that edge of helplessness now, like she had been completely blindsided. "But you told us you were fine there. You said you were happy with your apartment." "Yeah, I was. But I guess things change," I replied smoothly, adding just enough detachment to make it sound casual. I didn't really expect to give it away like that. But well, the offer was too good to refuse. A heavy silence hung in the air for a moment, broken only by the distant sound of Emily grumbling in the background. My dad was the first to speak again, but his voice was trembling with anger now. "Why didn't you tell us, Alex?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "You could have at least let us know. Now we're stuck in this mess, and Emily—" I didn't let him finish. "Look, Dad, you're acting like I did something wrong. I'm just living my life, and this was my decision. You know how things go with me. I do what works for me, and I don't check in with everyone else every step of the way. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore." My mom cut in before my dad could respond. "So what are we supposed to do now? Are you going to fix this? Or should we just drag Emily's stuff back home?" I let the question hang in the air for a second before answering. "Well," I said, pausing for effect, "I guess that's up to you. You could always, figure it out on your own. I'm sure there's a nice couch somewhere for Emily to sleep on." There was another long silence. I could practically feel the tension through the phone. My mom's next words were barely audible, filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. This isn't fair, Alex. You're just going to leave us to deal with it. I sighed dramatically, leaning back even further in my chair. Look, I'm sorry. I guess I should have told you sooner. But, sometimes life just happens. You can't expect me to always be the one to pick up the pieces. Emily's voice broke through again, louder this time, a mix of frustration and panic. What is all this, Alex? I grinned. I don't know what you want me to say, Em. Maybe you should have figured things out yourself, before relying on other people to solve your problems. The sound of Emily muttering something under her breath made me grin even wider, but I wasn't done yet. I had them right where I wanted them. I was enjoying this way too much to let it go. Anyway, gotta run, I said casually, cutting the conversation short. Good luck with everything though. I'm sure it'll work out. And with that I hung up, my fingers still buzzing from the tension I just left behind. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. I spent the rest of my afternoon with a strange mixture of satisfaction and anticipation, letting the chaos I just unleashed simmer for a bit. I knew my parents weren't the type to just give up. They put up a front of confusion, sure, but that was only the first stage. Once they realized they were actually stuck, that's when the drama would really kick in. And Emily, well, she would probably try to play the victim as usual. But I had no intention of letting them off the hook. Not this time. By the time I got to my actual apartment, the sun had begun to set. I strolled through the entrance, secured the door, and relaxed on the sofa. I felt incredibly serene. Guilt wasn't even a factor. This was retribution, plain and simple, for all the instances they had exploited me, manipulated me, and treated me like a fallback option. About an hour later, a knock echoed. I instantly became alert. I peered through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat. It was them, my parents, Emily, and hold on, her belongings. The vehicle was parked outside, the trunk ajar with boxes and bags piled high, resembling a scene from a cheesy sitcom. For a moment I just stood there, observing them through the peephole, experiencing a twisted sense of delight. They had actually tracked me down. They were clueless that I was residing here now, though. That was the highlight. They assumed they were simply arriving at the new location, my old place, but they were about to stumble into a confrontation. I unlatched the door gradually, ensuring I was composed, collected, and in command. Alex, my mom's voice came first, tentative, almost beseeching. We tried calling, but you didn't answer. We managed to figure out where you were living now. I arched an eyebrow. Oh, did you? How'd you manage that? Never mind that, my dad interjected, sounding defensive. We need to talk. You need to make this right. You did say Emily could move in here, and now she's got her things. We don't have anywhere else to go. I leaned against the doorframe, casually crossing my arms. That's the thing though, isn't it? I never said Emily could move in here. My dad's eyes widened, and I could sense his patience dwindling. Come on, Alex, don't make this harder than it has to be. You can't just leave us hanging like this. We came all this way, and now you're just going to refuse to help your sister out. What kind of brother are you? Emily, positioned just behind my parents, was scowling at me. I could almost see her mind attempting to process the situation, piecing it together in real time. This is absurd, Alex. You promised you'd let me move in, and now you're behaving as if you don't even recognize us. We've been in your life long enough for you to show some decency. Is that so? I responded, suppressing a smirk. You genuinely believe you're entitled to just barge into my apartment, as if this were some kind of lodging? I could see the instant they grasped they had made a colossal blunder. The realization was gradual, but it struck them like a ton of bricks. I was residing here. This apartment was mine, my genuine home, and they had appeared with Emily's luggage, anticipating a handout. Emily's face turned crimson with fury. What is this, Alex? You're seriously going to do this to me? After everything? I remained silent for a few moments, observing their expressions transition from bewilderment to exasperation and, ultimately, to humiliation. This was the instant they comprehended they'd been outmaneuvered, and the instant I resolved to tighten the screws even further. Look, I stated, taking a step nearer to them. I don't know how to put this any more clearly. This is my apartment. I didn't sell it. I didn't give it away. I'm not offering a free place for anyone. Not anymore. I could tell my parents were trying to process what I was saying. My mom looked like she was about to argue, but she stopped herself. The idea that I, Alex, the one who was always pushed around, was now standing in the way was too much for her to take in. You lied to us, Alex, my dad growled. You lied about everything. You knew this would happen, and now you're just leaving us to deal with your sister's problems. Shrugged. I didn't lie. You just didn't ask the right questions. Emily stepped forward now, hands on her hips, glaring at me. You're not even a real brother. I'm family, Alex. You're just going to throw me out like this. What happened to being there for each other? I looked at her blankly. I'm not throwing you out, Em. I'm just not opening the door for you. The tension was thick in the air. It felt like the perfect storm was coming, and I was the calm before the chaos. I could hear Emily's voice rising, a blend of frustration and desperation. My dad was pacing, muttering under his breath. My mom was on the verge of a breakdown, her face flushed with anger. It was almost too easy. Then Emily snapped. "Fine, if you won't let me in, we'll just have to make you." My heart skipped a beat as she stepped toward the door. For a brief moment, I thought she might actually try to force her way in. But that was the point when I decided I'd had enough. I took a deep breath, stepped forward and pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't say a word. I simply dialed the police. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I need to report trespassing." My parents and Emily stopped dead in their tracks, their faces going pale as they realized what I was doing. I didn't take my eyes off them as I spoke to the operator, calmly explaining the situation. "I've asked my family to leave," I said, keeping my voice even. "But they're refusing. They're trying to move into my apartment without permission, and I feel unsafe." I glanced at Emily, watching her face twist with anger and disbelief. My mom had gone completely silent, and my dad looked like he was trying to figure out how to save face. "This is going to end badly for you," Emily muttered, her voice venomous. I smiled a little, my voice steady. "We'll see about that, Em, we'll see." As I ended the call with the operator, I felt the full weight of my decision settle in. The next step was out of my hands. It was time for them to face the consequences. The sound of a siren in the distance was the only warning I got before the police arrived. The family stood frozen, glancing over at me with wide, apprehensive eyes, as though they'd hoped I'd back down at the last second. But I didn't budge an inch. I was beyond finished. I had endured their manipulative schemes for years, and this was the instant I was finally going to reclaim my space, my tranquility, and my life. The officer who emerged from the squad car was a tall woman with cropped brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She glanced at me initially, then at my parents and Emily, who were now awkwardly shuffling on the doorstep. They resembled children caught sneaking into a residence they weren't supposed to be in. "Good evening," the officer greeted, her voice firm but polite. "I understand there's an issue here." I nodded, my voice calm but with a sharp edge. "Yes, officer. These people," I gestured toward my parents and sister, "are trespassing. They showed up at my apartment, expecting to move in without my permission. I've asked them to leave multiple times, and now I'm concerned that they might try to force their way in." The officer glanced at my parents and then at Emily. "Is this true?" she asked, her tone not unkind but definitely direct. My parents hesitated. They clearly didn't want to admit they had miscalculated. But the truth was already on the table. Emily was the first to speak, her voice laced with frustration and denial. "He's lying," she snapped, her arms crossed defensively. "He invited me here. We came to move in like he said, and now he's trying to throw me out, after everything I've done for him. I'm his sister. I deserve this." The officer didn't flinch at her outburst. "Ma'am, if Mr. Alex has told you that this is his property, and he's asked you to leave, then you are trespassing. You can't just show up to someone's home uninvited and expect them to accommodate you." I could see my parents trying to wriggle out of it, shifting uncomfortably under the officer's gaze. "Look, officer, we didn't mean any harm," my dad said, holding his hands up. We thought Alex would be fine with it. We've helped him out before and he owes us. This isn't fair." The officer's expression didn't change. "I understand you may have had an expectation, sir, but that doesn't give you the right to violate someone else's boundaries or property. You need to leave. Now." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents exchanged looks, and I could practically feel the anger boiling in them. But they had no choice. The officer was being patient, but she wasn't going to let them make a scene. She turned to Emily. "You can either leave quietly now, or we'll have to escort you." Emily let out a frustrated growl. She was seething with rage, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, thinking about whether she could challenge this in some way. But before she could say anything else, the officer stepped forward, her voice firm. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. If you don't leave, I will place you under arrest for trespassing." The weight of those words hit my sister like a ton of bricks. Slowly, reluctantly, she backed away from the door, glaring at me as if I had somehow betrayed her. My parents followed suit, and I saw my mom's face twisted with frustration and shame as they all began to leave. As the officer walked them out, I stayed in the doorway, watching them go. It wasn't a moment of satisfaction, not really. It was more like an exhausting relief. The drama, the manipulation, the entitlement. It was all finally over. The police officer glanced at me before she left. "If there are any more issues, don't hesitate to call us again, okay?" she said in a softer tone. "Thank you, officer," I replied, nodding. With that, my parents and Emily were gone. The officer left, making sure to lock the door behind her. And just like that, my life was back to normal. Took a while to process everything. Honestly, I hadn't realized how much weight their constant presence had put on me. It wasn't just the moving in thing. It was years of being expected to drop everything for them, being the one they could manipulate when it was convenient for them. I had never been allowed to have a real sense of my own space, my own life. But now I did. The next day, I spent some time sorting through the aftermath. I figured I'd have to deal with the fallout sooner or later, but for the first time I didn't feel like I was responsible for fixing things. My phone had a dozen missed calls from my parents, all voicemails of angry rants. Emily's texts were full of insults and demands, calling me everything from selfish to heartless. But I didn't care. I blocked all their numbers. It's been a couple of weeks since that day, and things have settled down. I've gotten some peace, and I've been able to focus more on my own life, my own career, and my friends. I've been able to breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next favor would come up, or when they'd show up asking for something. But now I'm curious. What do you all think? Was I too harsh on them? Did I take things too far? I'm not asking for sympathy, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about the way I handled it. Did I do the right thing? Or could I have approached it differently? I'd love to know your thoughts.